This is a text-to-speech presentation. The original one was in Hungarian language. The text-to-speech software was from imtranslator.com.
There will be three of us, who talk about the marriage of Raiffeisen Bank and TRMT. The sequence of presentations practically follows the development process. First I will talk a little bit, first György Tokovicz, development part. Second Susan Antle, quality assurance part. Third Gabor Jek, operations part. This is roughly the agenda I planned. Obviously, there are many connection points between the presentations. This is not surprising. I will try not to repeat the things that Andras said, I will refer to those or simply will not read it. I would like to put it in a context, where we come from, where we are heading, and where this TRMT thing is. Roughly, without specifying the years, you can see an evolution going to the top from the bottom. These are the bank's platforms and the utilized architectures. This is where we are now. It was approximately 3 years ago that we made the step towards the so-called service-oriented architecture, to this unbeaten path. We have experienced everything. I think the situation is similar in similar financial institutions. Probably these platforms and architectures are not unknown. The beauty of the thing is that they don't follow each other. We accumulate the pleasure, and all of these exist like this, up to the present day. This figure is probably familiar. This is a very high-level logical view of our architecture. Obviously, each layer has a physical representation. There is somebody in the audience, who belongs neither to Raiffeisen, nor to T-Logic, but was there, when this architecture was born. Moreover, we can attribute to him, the writing of the first services. Moreover, this was the subject of his diploma work. Yes, there are many familiar faces in the audience. This is another view of the architecture. It is important, because those small circles signal how many different interfaces, or let's name the child properly, services written for different platforms and architectures are meant when talking about one single term deposit considered simple. And it shows how their cooperation is implemented. Obviously TRMT is a tool that is useful for us in handling these. Respectively, had we known this, we would have surely implemented it much earlier. When this was developed, we haven't implemented it, and a few nasty accidents occurred. Figures about the services: currently we have 26 in the live environment, 15 under development and 10 under design. This is a total of 51 if I count well, and the operations figure for these services is 278. We talk about roughly 200,000 service calls per day currently in the live environment. This includes only the business services. If we add the infrastructure services as well, then the number is approximately 1 million. We have to comply with, respectively enforce all kinds of naughty rules in this environment in order to keep the order. The left side describes the environment we suffer from, and there is the right side that would mitigate this, but we don't like it, isn't it? Because we don't like to administrate, and we don't even know how to do it. We hate rules. We register dependencies in an Excel table, in a Word document, in 1,000 different ways, and then as operations increase in size, this hits back. We work with approximately 10 strategic partners or suppliers. As the number of projects changes, this means approximately 50 developers. A part of these developers are permanently located at our site, a part of them connect remotely, and a part of them just send in the code. We need to keep order in this environment on 8 platforms, more than 30 running projects and other minor tasks. This is not an easy task. Let's see how we can respond to these challenges using TRMT. Firstly, we realized that we need to maintain the order in our own house definitely. For this, we have created a small mini-team within the department that is responsible for complying with the processes in-house, and one of the main tools they use is TRMT. An integrated test environment called FIT Developers Integration Test Environment is under preparation. Susan will talk about it. These quality assurance rules will really be applied there, and this small team will show its tiger claws there. Currently we cannot exercise control in all cases, over each development, because certain things crawl in under the grass, in a non-standard way. We can certainly state that we already have the tool for it, as Andras also said. We have trained 3 colleagues, we have pretty good support, contacts, agreements. There were things we wanted in the tool, those were included. Andras already talked about them, I don't want to repeat it. This means that it is possible to retrieve, from the tool's database, essentially all information that is needed, either for debugging, or for investigations, or for planning. The most important thing from a developer point of view and the tool's most important benefit is that it creates the dependencies based on code analysis, not based on the documentation, and not based on the information in the heads, but actually based on the codes currently stored in the existing CVS, and this provides us much safety, I have to say that. Okay. There aren't really any new projects starting nowadays, but still there are some that started, and in such cases it's a really big help that always when a new company, a new person, a new colleague comes. It is always a big problem, beyond procuring a desk and a machine, to create an environment where she can quickly start working. I don't know whether Andras covered this. The relief is that it is relatively easy to create a software environment if one wants to use reusable components and wants to create them in her own developer environment according to the current release. The other such big principle that we have introduced this way, and we can more or less already apply it, that we would like to know what it is that runs in our shop. This wasn't always like this. There were times when the version handling system was my boss's drawer, then the supplier came and placed a CD there, and if we had to touch something, the problem was whether the release number written on the current CD or DVD is indeed the real one, whether the source code attached to it is the one that runs in the live environment. We just had such a case last week. We had to touch a supplier's code, but thanks God it was already under TRMT, so an internal employee could execute the quick fix that was needed. We were able to do it because we could retrieve the given release, the given source code using TRMT. This again is a very fresh example, an example from this week, a typical case. It works in the integrated environment, but it doesn't work in development. No one knows why. Apparently everything is alright, connections are okay, interfaces are okay, adapters are running. It's a well-known phenomena. After a call to the support hotline, it turns out that the version running in that integrated environment is not the one that should run in production, and again we could retrieve it using TRMT. And one additional information, of course nobody changed any of the environments since February, at least none of those responsible for it knew about it, and then we retrieved using TRMT what was the last release in production and we could deploy it back to all environments. This is how we made a step forward in debugging. Andras talked about this, Gabor will talk too. There were large disputes between development and operations. It is not enough to implement the product itself, and to comply with the rules, but for example we need to be able to correctly write these scripts in order for the deployment and automation to be really effective. This wasn't like this in all cases. We had examples for a deployment that ran instead of a few minutes, which is normal, it ran for long minutes. This blew the fuse at operations. They said it's TRMT's fault. Then of course it turned out that the deploy script was written incorrectly, but probably, Gabor will talk about this, why we considered it to be too long, and what we need to pay attention to at implementation. We were thinking about this with my colleague Susan Antle, that in the last 2.5 months I have sat through 4 audits, and that the audits are evolving, and that the auditors are evolving. They ask very intelligent and naughty, smart questions. Together with Susan we thought that we would record it and we will seat the next auditor, give him popcorn and cola, and project all the audits. Typically they had questions like, who? How? When? Who has permissions? Why this way? From which version handling system? Why not that way? Who checks? Who regulates? How are the parameters set? The database itself that is behind TRMT, and the interface through which this can be queried, all this can be shown in production even to the auditors. It speeds up the process to get through the difficulties, through the audits. Jokes aside, it is very useful that it contains all relevant information that can come up during such an audit, either external, either internal. A few figures specifically about the development line. Currently we have 109 projects in TRMT, all our Java J2E services are in there. Let me say again, under our own internal quality assurance and control, this means as many releases and release processes. The development of 4-5 applications is currently in progress on this platform, all those will increase this figure. TRMT in the banking environment, Andras already talked about these two. We have two things in production, two things in pilot operations. In the FIT environment, I already mentioned that to you, one of the main tools in this will be TRMT. Very briefly about the WSR integration, this roughly the model at the bank. This is how the lifecycle management of services is performed, and TRMT itself is here in the chain or in the connections, and we can see that there are metadata exchanged in the connection with the services registry, as Andras also mentioned, WSDL XSD descriptive data, respectively the status of the service itself in its lifecycle that is in the given release test environment or in the live environment. It makes the possibility to retrieve in the runtime things very simple, and this status change is obviously automated, otherwise it would make no sense to connect the service registry in TRMT. Here you can see that we use CVS in the Java, BPEL, and the messaging environment. Obviously this also means an integration, and here you can see the automated deployment in the runtime environment itself. This is what I wanted to briefly say.